All right, everyone. The red light is on and we are recording. This is Mark and Kyle back for another week of the Weekly SITREP, where every week we get together and we talk about some of the big news from business and politics from the last week. All in effort, if you're someone who is thinking about getting out of the military and you're trying to contemplate life in the civilian world and trying to understand like what's happening, trying to understand the news and trying to understand what is this crazy world, what is this industry that I'm heading into. Kyle and I are just trying to shed light on what is happening. Thus, one, you can kind of have a better understanding of the operating environment that you're entering into, and you can take that information and bring it into job interviews, school interviews, or just your general decision-making process. So one, we'll apologize. We've kind of been off the last couple of weeks. I've been super swamped with schoolwork. Kyle's been on some vacation, doing some other work and everything. So we've kind of dropped the ball the last few weeks, but we're back on the game right now. So don't stress about it. We'll catch you all up on the big stuff. So every week we start off with the mission brief. And so this is a way to just kind of ease into the conversation. So this is, defense and security related news. As veterans, we still kind of like to keep our fingers on the pulse of what's happening out there in the national security establishment. So the first one we'll talk about is Joe Biden and Afghanistan. Oh my God, I'm getting so sick of talking about Afghanistan for seemingly just about my entire life. But it seems like maybe the end is actually coming, y'all. It's kind of crazy. The original pullout date. The original pullout date I think was going to be May 1st. And the new administration is saying, okay, it's probably not going to happen, but we're going to be out by the end of this year.
Did you ever deploy to Afghanistan, Mark?
I didn't. No. I did Iraq, Syria, and Saudi Arabia, but never Afghanistan.
A veritable grab bag of goodies.
Yeah.
I deployed to Afghanistan from 2010 to 2011 during the Obama surge, right? And really interesting. We had a lot of troops in country, and I remember sitting on a runway, or not really on a runway, on a parking pad next at Jalalabad with some other, officers and pilots, right? We were waiting to go pick somebody up, and, we were talking about, are we ever going to leave? And they all were like laughing, and they're like, this is never going to end. And when I read this article, like, if you haven't heard about it, right, the Trump administration, there was a lot of stuff that happened during the Trump administration. It was a lot of noise, stuff happening every day.
Yeah.
They negotiated with the Taliban to leave this year, and now that agreement is still in place. And so the Biden administration is basically saying, well, we still want to honor that agreement, but we're not sure if May 1st is going to happen. And I feel like when I listen to this, I have some thoughts about it. One, I think that's an excuse for them to stay in Afghanistan, right? Like, say, just keep slipping, or the conditions aren't right. The conditions are right. But Joe Biden says he wants to leave, and he's been a big proponent of leaving Afghanistan in a way that is, I think, even more reduced than where we are at now. Because, like when I was there, right, we had like 100,000 troops plus all these contractors and everything.
Right.
So there's probably closer to like 200,000. But now, they have a very small residual force there, and they want to cut that down even further. So the idea that I think you would really have an even smaller presence, to me, is a little hard to imagine, because we already have a vanishingly small presence there now anyway. So I'll be interested to see what this kind of like looks like in the future here. Joe Biden has always been a big proponent of, well, we'll just have special forces there and they'll just train, work with the Afghan partners.
Right.
Special forces need enablers, right? They need ISR, they need aviation, they need fires, they need all sorts of stuff. You need medevac, right?
Right.
And the Afghan, military is obviously just still not there, despite us, pouring years and years of training into them. I mean, they're flying Black Hawks now, which is an improvement. But still, I bet that this gets extended. I bet come next year we'll still be talking about this.
Yeah, I don't doubt that either. And I think kind of the reality too, like whenever politicians talk about keeping a counterterrorism presence, I think they think that means that there would just be like a battalion of Rangers or something sitting on a base somewhere, or like some small soft element, and that 100 dudes can just control the country out of Afghanistan and go do raids and everything. But like that's not how you get intelligence to find targets to strike. Like you have to have people out in villages, you have to have people out on the ground, you have to have ISR around, you have to have assets, like to be able to find targets to actually do anything on, to actually have a counterterrorism mission. You can't just plop, a small group of guys in there and just have them get rid of every bad actor in the country.
Yeah, and if you ever wonder about like what, we say, hey, we have only 1,000 troops or X number of troops in a country, right? And they're still performing, activities, would be the way to put it. If you ever think about how we kind of get around that, right? I have an old friend of mine who I served with, he was a junior warrant and I was a new lieutenant when we showed up to our flight company, and I kept on going to go do my real life officer thing, as they called it in aviation, and he continued to go do the flying warrant thing,
Right.
and eventually he moved to fixed wing, right? And so he
Mhm.
was flying these King Airs doing signals intelligence, essentially, where they're analyzing, traffic,
Right.
electromagnetic traffic, right? And so he got out of the army, and then he went and he's doing the same job as a contractor, and so he regularly goes over to like Afghanistan for like 3 months and does the exact same job he was doing in the army, but he gets paid
Yeah.
a lot more.
Yeah.
And but he doesn't count for a troop level, right?
Right.
But he's still doing the same job.
Right.
So there's a lot of there's a lot of shell games being played.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, I think I tend to agree with you, Kyle, that Afghanistan will be the gift that keeps on giving in the news world here. Okay. Well, we'll move on past the ever-present story of Afghanistan and talk about the Pentagon budget. Okay. So the article we're looking at, it's in Defense One, and essentially what they're talking about is that the Pentagon budget, and I don't think this will probably really come as a surprise to most people, is saying, this person is arguing that it's overly weighted towards traditional forms of warfighting, towards aircraft carriers, airplanes, infantry, and everything, and not nearly weighted enough towards cyber defense, cybersecurity, cyber offense, and all those aspects of warfighting. They're like, we're still trying to figure out, and we're still trying to figure out like what that landscape looks like. But in reality, that this person is saying, and I tend to agree with them, that probably will be, where we significantly get attacked in the future. And we're starting to see, the SolarWinds attack. We're starting to see, there's been a number of other high profile events where data has been collected and like they've gotten into different systems and all across the government and everything. And that, this person is saying we're not quite positioning ourselves as the United States in a good enough way to be able to counter this in the future.
Yeah. It's weird coming from an environment like the Army, which
Right.
is, prior to 9/11 was a force that would not really do much, right? It would kind of sit on military bases and we would kind of do our training, and it just wouldn't do much, right? Because the Army is expensive. It's really huge to move. It really is, when you think of like the nation's war fighting capability, it's kind of like something you would use to really like invade another country with, or perform some sort of massive defensive action. And now the Army is transformed into this kind of modular mobile, or it transformed into this modular mobile, hey, we deploy brigades at a time. And now there's trying to go back to this peer-to-peer or near-peer conflict capability. But when you look at the Pentagon's budget, right, when you think about that, and I think that makes a lot of people in the Army think that, hey, we're the center, the locus of like national defense. But really, for force projection capabilities, there's really three domains, right? Or four, depending on how you want to talk about them. There's the Navy, right? The Navy is huge force projection. It's constantly out there patrolling, ensuring freedom of navigation. I mean, just look at the Evergreen that's currently stuck in the Suez Canal to see an example of what a choke point.
We'll be talking about this more in a
Yeah.
second here, but yeah, continue.
There's the Air Force, right? The Air Force and its force projection capabilities are immense. The ability to deliver, long range accurate, essentially fires, or show force, or patrol an area. There's
or even just load up tanks in the back of an aircraft and be able to pop them down somewhere. Like no one else can do that like we can.
No,
it's crazy.
No, yeah, nobody else can do that. No, and nobody else can fly a B-52 through the China Sea,
right,
South China Sea, to remind China that it doesn't belong to them.
Right.
The the cyber domain, right? That's huge force projection capability, and one that what this article is really talking about, and it's saying that the ability to project force, right? War, conflict changes, right? It goes from, what we when you think about like the Civil War to World War I to World War II, right? Different force projection capabilities are more important, and and saying, hey, who would have thought, like, why would we have invested in air forces, right, during the Civil War when they became vitally important? And this is the same sort of thought along the lines of the cyber and space domains, which is the fourth one I was going to list. And so what this article is really talking about is just saying, hey, you people need to kind of get their heads wrapped around on what like a future conflict would look like, right? Because it's gonna happen in the Navy, it's gonna happen in the air, it's gonna happen in the sea, and it's gonna happen in the cyber domain world and in space. And this article is like, well, as much as the Army, needs all these upgrades and equipment to maintain a near peer, there's also this capability that needs to be addressed. So really interesting. They were saying don't raise the top line budget from 740 billion, but really try to think carefully about the systems we're working on. Which I guess for me, I'm currently helping with some ground combat systems here, so I don't know. Maybe that isn't good for me economically, but
A fantastic book I recommend anyone to read is called Ghost Fleet, and
yeah.
I had started it. I had started a couple years ago, and then got a couple chapters in. Was like, didn't hit me, and then I came back to it, and once I started reading it again, I couldn't put it down. So essentially, what happens is that it's written by these two. They're actually like journalists, so they mostly write news articles and everything, and they take technologies, some type of defense technologies, and they put it, these technologies that are in like their very, very, very early stages right now, and they fast forward 50 years to when these technologies are at like a much more mature stage, and then they write this fictional story of what global conflict looks like when we have things like satellite lasers shooting each other, and
Lasers.
and like superhumans literally that have been given some type of like genetic engineering to make these crazy ridiculous Navy SEALs like fly at buildings and shit. And it's pretty wild. And again, it's all like all the technologies that they talk about are all stuff that are based in that there's like some type of like foundational reality in them right now. They're not just totally made up. It's some type of someone's working to create this thing that they're working on right now, and it's pretty wild. So I highly encourage you to read it. It's a fascinating book.
Yeah, one reason why the Army or the military now has all these innovation commands set up to try and capture some of this, it'll only continue to accelerate. It's the military, the defense complex, and the intelligence community has woken up to how urgent this is. So, yeah, I've never read Ghost Fleet, but I've heard great things about it. So maybe if I want to read it, terrify myself, that I'll pick it up here. I don't have any time to read dirty stuff though. So.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, that wraps up the mission briefs. Now we're gonna head over to the Civvy SITREP. So this is civilian-related news, mostly happening in the world of business and politics. So we just talked about the ability of the Navy to project power around the world, and I think a lot of times most people tend to vastly underestimate the importance of global shipping, just because you don't see it. When you're driving down the highway, like you see tractor trailers and everything, and you think like this one truck carrying this one container, like, oh wow, it's a lot, right? What you're not seeing is that there's a shipping container or a container ship, excuse me, that's floating in the ocean that has hundreds, if not thousands, of these containers, and like that's how just a ton of goods are moved all around the world. And one of those major one of those major choke points is the Suez Canal. It's really kind of like what connects Europe and Asia, and then as well as Africa as well. Otherwise, you get all the way around Africa. So the Suez Canal is hugely important to reducing costs and making trade faster. And the ship, the Evergreen, is stuck. It's just grounded. I'm sure everyone has seen the wonderful memes. Ever Given, excuse me, has seen the wonderful memes from this. I think they've been absolutely hilarious. But what's your take on the current stuff? What's your current take?
Yeah.
What's your current take on this, Kyle? My bad.
Yeah, the first is that this has been a meme machine.
It's awesome.
It's incredible. I mean, there's just so many allegories that get. I mean, most of it is like when you see it, it's like some huge monumental, whatever, and there's like the bulldozer.
Right.
It's actually kind of the size of this thing is immense. I think I saw an infographic. It's like as big. It's as tall. It's as long as the Empire State Building is tall, which is
huge,
massive. And when you think about this, intermodal transportation, which is really what these shipping containers are, right? So these shipping containers, when they came out in the 50s, revolutionized global travel, or not global travel, global trade, because they can easily be picked up and they can be put on a train, they can be put on a ship, they can be put on a semi, right? They're very easy to transport. And I know people in the military have had a ton of fun with the various permutations of shipping containers.
Sure.
You live in them, you pack stuff in them, you're responsible for them.
I was actually just at a bar yesterday in Charlottesville that has like a whole back area just made out of shipping containers. It's great.
Yeah, they have some of that stuff in Austin too, and it's I always get a chuckle out of it. They global travel. This is almost a cautionary tale about how interconnected the globe is, right? Because for decades now, with the rise of information systems and better management practices and techniques, we have gone to this on-demand shipping, right? Or on-demand resources. So if you want something, there's no like inventory, you click it, it's manufactured, it's put on a highly efficient global trade system that's then routed right to your doorstep. It's a miracle of modern life.
Yeah.
And this shows, I think, an example of how kind of fragile that system is. It works every day, but if there was like a war, or if there was like some sort of like natural disaster, we don't really have the same manufacturing capabilities at home. So you would have something like this where a critical canal or waterway is stuck, and you can't get trade through it, right? And instead, ships are having to now go around the Horn of Africa. But what's interesting about this to me, from an engineering standpoint, is I guess this ship, they said like there's a lot of bad weather, and it like blew the ship over into the side here, and the bow of it, which, have you ever seen one of these large ships, right? The bow of it actually extends, but I don't know the exact name, but there's like a protruding element that comes from that's underneath the water and actually goes out in front of the ship. That is like stuck in this sandbar, like 16 feet.
Oh my
gosh. Like it's like six, like that's why they can't pull this thing out, because it's like literally stuck like 16 feet into it. And so when you see that excavator, you're trying to remove that to get the very front part of this bow out. And people are like, why don't you get some like 2 tugboats or whatever? Like apparently, if they tried to do that, if they tried to just pull them at the angle that you thought it would make sense to pull them at, like the suction from the water would be so great that it wouldn't be possible. So from an engineering problem, it's really fascinating. And so there's a bunch of things they got to do. So they managed to, I think, get the rudder. They're able to use the rudders now and restart the engines, but they're waiting for, they need the tide to come up, and they also might need to make the ship lighter. And then I saw like an idea maybe being floated of using like Chinooks to, like, because these shipping containers, they have to take them off. A Chinook could swing load one of these things out, and so they could remove these containers, right, to make the ship lighter, and that might make it easier to get it out. But I mean, it's insane, right? And you've got all these ships now who are now going around the Cape of Good Hope like it's the 1700s, instead of the Suez Canal. And it's actually, I thought that it is much longer, but I actually thought it would have been much longer than it is right now. So if you were going to go from Singapore to Rotterdam, right, in the Netherlands, which is a common shipping route, some big ports right before to get stuff, it would take 34 days to go from Singapore through the Suez Canal to Rotterdam. From to go around the Cape, it's 43 days. So it's an increase from 8,300 miles to almost 12,000 miles. So, a fairly significant increase, but not as, I thought it would be more, but still, I mean, it just goes to show how critical, these supply lines are, and, why the U.S. Navy is so important in keeping, because imagine that's just one choke point. There are other choke points in the world that you could like shut off global trade with, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um,
I remember when I was in Saudi Arabia, like the two major ones. So you have on the west side of Saudi Arabia, you have
mhm,
the Bab el Mandeb Strait, which is
yeah,
essentially like part of the same waterway that's south of the Suez Canal. And then on the east side, you have the Strait of Hormuz, where about like 25% of the world's oil goes through there. And oh, by the
yeah,
way, it's the area of water in between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So it's obviously somewhere that has like huge potential for bad things to happen, right? Um, and these are just major choke points where so much stuff goes through, and we're talking, I mean, massive percentages of world trade going through this area that's like 30 miles across, and we're all trying to like make it through there. And in particular, I know with the massive container ships and everything, places like the huge canals that are out there, the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal, have had a particular problem with these mega shipping container ships that have come out in the last few years that are just gargantuan, and they just can't fit. They're just too big to slide through there and everything. Okay.
I also think they were designed to not go through
Yeah.
canals. They were
Yeah. Some of
designed
them
to be
were for sure.
so big that they could just go in the open water
Right.
and just do it, right, and just plow through anything. But uh, people are always looking for efficiencies, and they said, well, we could fit them through
Yeah.
a canal. There's also some political stuff to talk about here. The uh, so the president of Egypt apparently is like kind of really on the hot seat for this because they recently expanded the Suez Canal to allow for larger ships and more ships, and he with the promise that it would increase revenue and
Hmm.
overall be a net good for Egypt. And apparently this is not like materialized, so like he's super in the hot seat here for this, right? And people are very upset about it. I mean, not like, I don't know what he could have done, but you know you got to blame somebody. uh, it's crazy. I mean, this is. I hope they get this thing unstuck soon because I don't know. It just seems like not a good thing.
As much as I appreciate the memes, it's bad for everybody. It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, we're gonna move on to the housing market. So
Yeah.
right now we're looking. The title of the article is "Pandemic Ignited Housing Boom," but it's different from the last one. So I think what this article did was compare the current housing boom that's happening to pre 2008 financial crisis and everything. So 2008, there were a lot of loans going out to a lot of people who were probably not fully qualified, a lot of bad loans, a lot of just risky bets that were happening. And then, those risky loans were getting put into security options where, it looked really good on the surface, but you dig underneath and it's full of all these bad loans and everything. Okay. So lots of just kind of not perfect good due diligence going on from a business perspective back in 2008. Now is a little different. Banks are maintaining good standards on how they're giving out loans. Um, there's plenty of well qualified home buyers out there, and it's just a very different market. But we're just seeing like the squeeze of lots of people want to buy a home right now, and there's just not enough demand to meet all the supply that's happening.
Yeah. It's this has been so insane, right? You gave a pretty good summary of the '08 crisis. I graduated in West Point in '08,
Yeah.
and immediately the world economy melted down. I was like sitting in Bullock, kind of just doing my happy lieutenant thing, right, and being
Yeah.
like, I don't know
Yeah.
what's going on in the outside world.
Yeah.
It's interesting about the '08 crisis from when people say, hey, why is this time different? The '08 crisis was really ignited by um, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which was passed after Enron, and it made it a lot. It made it the financial disclosures much more stringent for companies, right? And so it really dampened companies going public, and it still has dampened companies going public. It's one reason you see SPACs, for example, as a huge avenue towards accessing capital markets here in the U.S. So when you think about the '08 crisis, right? Investors started looking for, they were looking at, hey, we're looking at the opportunity cost here. We need a place to still make money, and they piled into these mortgage-backed securities, which, like you gave a good overview of, were not that great. And so along with a lot of cheap credit, that just led to this huge overinflation of the housing market that eventually collapsed once people realized that these homes are not actually worth what people, what they were being said they were. But now it's much different, right? And there's a few major reasons for that. Obviously, COVID has really reshaped, I think, especially for the millennial generation, which led the reurbanization of cities. Everybody's seen that. Um, but millennials are the largest living adult generation, and we're now in our prime, years. I'm in my mid 30s, uh, and I'm, probably I would be considered an older millennial, given my mid 80s entry into this world. So they, but millennials now say, hey, we want to go buy homes. We're having families, like all of my
Yeah.
friends have families now. It's just a matter of time, and they've been saving, right? Millennials have famously not bought a lot of stuff. They've not been very they've not been big on a lot of we consider asset purchases, right? And so they all have a lot of savings, and now they say, okay, now I want to go buy a home for my family. And the market has just not kept up demand. There's been a bunch of reasons for that. You could say, well, like, hey, there's regulations, right? Those are famously captured in places like California. But there's just not been enough demand for homes, right? And you think about that, well, how can that be, since '08, like, we had all these homes and there's a huge glut. Well, the US continues to grow, right? Population continues to expand. You see this, with voting every 4 years. People say, well, how can, like, X number of votes be given when, 4 years, when there were X number of votes that was smaller 4 years ago? And it's like, because the US population continues to increase. I don't know how people don't understand that. And so new home construction hasn't kept up with demand. There's record low interest rates. It's incredibly cheap to get a mortgage. I think I saw a number that was, for every 1% increase in a mortgage interest rate, a buyer's purchasing power, like, decreases by like 100,000 or something. Maybe that's the number I saw, because it increases the monthly cash flow that's
Okay. Yeah.
required to
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
service the mortgage. And so now you have, like, a huge, you have almost no inventory, and everybody has cash. And there's also, like, fintech startups, right? That I know of a few in Austin that'll basically take exceptionally well qualified buyers and say, hey, we're just going to give you the money, right? It's going to be like a 10-day mortgage process. So you can go and do an all cash offer with some houses. And that's,
That's
if
crazy.
I mean, it's crazy, right? So, like,
Yeah.
if you say, hey, I want to bring like 50% down to the table, I'm ready to waive all appraisals, contingencies, people are like, do better. Because they say, we've got an all cash offer here. It's
That's
insane.
nuts.
You never would have seen it like that.
Yeah.
And but it's still, but when we say, why is it different from last time, it is still hard to get a mortgage if you do not have good credit.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people with better credit now and a lot of money to spend.
Yeah.
And so they're just competing for a limited inventory of homes. And I mean, this has affected everything from, like, commodity prices. Like, we'll talk about this in a second, because we'll talk about my Austin locale here. But it is, like, impossible to get lumber now. Somebody was telling me what lumber
Yeah.
used to be selling for like $10, for X number amount of lumber. Now it's like 50 or something. I mean, it's absolutely wild. So I I don't know. I guess good to be in, if if you're in the position, right? If you have a home. I recently sold a rental house that I owned down in Enterprise, Alabama, for my flight school days. That the market there had now, like, increased enough that it made sense. I mean, I couldn't believe it, right? So,
Yeah.
but if you're thinking about, like, buying a home, I mean, like, I wouldn't, don't wait, don't think. I mean, you can say, maybe I want to wait until the market settles down in 3 years. There's no guarantee it might. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, it depends a lot too on, like what kind of markets you're looking at and everything. Like, I know, we're going to talk about Austin here in a second, and it seems like everyone in the world is trying to flock to Austin right now. I'll tell a story of, like, I have a close family member who lives in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so, for those of you who don't know about Raleigh, it's a pretty good sized city. I don't know. I want to say a couple 100,000 or something. And it's in the Research Triangle. So some big universities around there. Great city to go to. Anyway, this family member was telling me that, they recently refinanced their house, and their home value had gone up just, I mean, a lot, like a lot. And the lawyer that they were working with to refinance their home was telling them that he's having people come in particular from New York City and the Bay, who want to move to Raleigh because it's a good tech city, but it's just a way cheaper cost of living, and they're going in, 20, 30, 40% over asking price, and just like, I don't care, this is so much cheaper than where I'm coming from.
It's
So just
around
like,
an error. Yeah.
yeah, just like throwing money at it, who cares?
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. And we'll in the Austin article here in a second, we'll kind of dive into some actual numbers here. But here there's something I wanted to see here. Unlike the building boom of the mid 2000s, a deficit of homes for sale is playing a big role in the current spike in prices. New home construction hasn't kept up with demand in recent years as builders take years to recover from the financial crisis and face shortages of land and skilled labor. So, we're still seeing effects from the 2008 crisis. That's how big of a bubble this was. That it's affecting the ability to actually construct homes. And what has it said? According to the Fed, 7 out of 10 mortgages currently are going to borrowers with credit scores above 760. So, exceptionally well qualified, buyers. Whereas in 2008, not the case. Okay, all right. So let's go ahead and I think we've about beat that to
Yeah,
death.
yeah.
So
Let's go ahead and get talked to Austin. You can go ahead and start because I know this is kind of your key interest right now.
Yeah, so maybe I can back up here and just kind of talk about why this is just blows me away so much, right? So when COVID started last year, my family and I, we were living in Chicago, in downtown, or not downtown Chicago, in a neighborhood called East Lakeview, which is near Wrigley. And COVID started, and about a month into it, I said, I'm not doing this. Packed everybody up, came down to Alabama, put the place on the market, sold it very quickly, managed to get out without losing my ass, which was great, obviously. And then immediately pivoted and say, hey, we've talked about moving back to Austin for a long time. Let's go ahead and do it. So went there, did some diligence, found where we wanted to build, put down the contract and everything. And so we're in the mid 850s, right? If you and so I recently went out there to because it's getting the home is almost complete. It'll be done sometime in July.
Right.
And we went for this pre-sheetrock walkthrough, and my wife has been keeping tabs on what's going on in the neighborhood as she likes to do. And there was a house that went up on the market for 1.4 million. That was, or no, maybe it went up for 1.3. Yeah, it was like 1.32 or something. It's kind of like a similar house, right? Yeah, I mean,
Right.
I don't think like drastically like it wasn't like something that it had like 2,000 extra square feet or
Right.
something.
Right.
It had a very nice backyard, from my understanding. Very, very nice backyard. A lot of money had been poured into it with the pool and everything, and it went over asking. So it went from like 1.3 to like 1.4. Right. And
to go back to
it's
this house comparison, right? I'm sure it was a nice backyard, but it probably wasn't, 550K backyard, right?
yeah. I mean, it's crazy, right? It wasn't 500. It wasn't a 550K backyard, and it and so it wasn't on the market for very long. It was on the market for like 10 days or something. It was like boom,
That's
off the
nuts.
market, over asking. And then that comp immediately caused some other houses to go on the market. So now there's like houses on the street for sale for like 1.1, and they were probably built for like 750s or something. So I mean, crazy, right? It's just absolutely crazy. And this article here is saying, Austin is selling for more over asking price than any major U.S. city. Homes are selling for 7% over asking price, right? And the average Austin home listed at 400K, selling for 428. This is just nuts, right? And my realtor has explained to me that they have something like 2 days worth of inventory in Austin, which for realtors would say like how long would it take to run through all the available open inventory in the Austin market? And they say it only take 2 days. So if you want to, so like you can still build in Austin. It's fairly easy. Just go find like a builder
Right.
and put down the money. You're just going to have to wait a year because there's no construction material. Our general contractor told us we were lucky to get lumber. There's no construction material. There's no
Oh my
labor.
gosh, man.
And so but if you want to pay for something now, you can. It's just you're going to pay what in the M&A world you'd call a control premium. So I mean, it's just wild. Like, and I mean, I sure hope this keeps up. I'd like my house to be worth it, continue to be worth a ton of money. But
Yeah, sure, man.
I think to talk from like the macro effects here now, the kind of like a micro market of what's going on, wild, absolutely wild. It makes me wish I would have bought when I was stationed there. But if I could see into the future, I would be very, 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 very rich. Which
We all have those,
yeah. So
I like to tell everyone my favorite, coulda, woulda, shoulda investing story. So I actually bought some Zoom stock at IPO,
okay.
kept it for a couple months, like double my money on it, and was like, solid, nice, getting out. And then like 6 months later, pandemic hit, and it just like skyrocketed.
Yeah, I think
Can't see that one coming,
Yeah, I think about Tesla, right? Tesla, I don't know. I gotta do more options trading, but only call options. Only call or put options that I can buy. I don't actually want to sell anything.
Right. Okay. We're going to shift from talking real estate here for a little bit and go back to a subject we've talked about a number of times, and this is our SPACs. Okay. So just to kind of quick rehash on what a SPAC is. A SPAC is a special purpose acquisition company. And essentially what it is it's more or less, for lack of kind of better terminology, a shell corporation that goes public, raises a bunch of money, and uses that money to then acquire another company or fund into a certain idea. Okay, that's kind of like the basic premise of it. There's a lot of kind of talk of it going on right now because one, it's a very hot SPAC market. Lots of SPACs are going in and raise a bunch of money and everything, and at the same time, a lot of like very kind of traditional investing advice is very reticent towards encouraging people to go towards SPACs just because it's not a company that has a proven business model yet. It's not a company that's really producing revenue or anything yet. You're just investing in something that's then essentially going to invest in something else. And so you as the average investor don't necessarily have a whole lot of oversight over that. But lots of people are getting into them right now. And so the story we're going to talk about today are SPACs and WeWork. So I think it was maybe like was it a year and a half, 2 years ago? I can't remember anymore. When WeWork was like blowing up in the news, Kyle, do you remember?
Yeah, what I'm actually doing right now is, and I feel bad. Okay, here we go. Yeah, it was back in, so just prior to COVID, disrupting everything. And this was when SITREPs was still, I had just kind of started, so I was talking about this. But yeah, so WeWork, which if you're not familiar with the business model, and yeah, I'm sure a lot of people in the military are not. It is a office lease business model, right? So what WeWork does is it enters into long-term leases with office buildings or whatever organization owns or entity that owns like a place to lease office space. It then renovates them heavily and then leases them out for terms as little as like a month, right? So it's basically like a shared work office space. It was very, I mean, it'll come back, right? But it was very, very hip back in the pre-COVID days, the before times, if anybody can remember that. I mean, I remember I visited
back in the great long ago.
Yeah, I mean, I visited Israel, and I mean, even they had concept there, right? And it's very cool, right? If you need like a space to a startup, perhaps you can just like rent this. It's pretty easy. But it was gonna IPO, right? And it was led by this dude named Adam Newman, who's completely insane. He he
to
was
put it lightly.
I think in the S1, which was not your staff section, but a document that you file with the SEC to say, hey, I want to we want to do an IPO. They were saying they wanted to like lift like the cosmic energy of the world or something. That was like their mission statement or something. Yeah. And this dude was like living out in like French Polynesia or Tahiti or something, just totally he wasn't like asleep at the wheel. He's just nuts. And his wife apparently was nuts also with the way they handled. I mean, total founder kind of mindset, right? Because they were the founders. And it was going to be like the biggest IPO ever, right? It was going to IPO. What was the valuation in August 2019? It was 47 billion. But the problem is they were losing tons of money, like tons of money. So it was all sorts of hype. And so when the so they filed these documents, right? This is an example of the public capital markets doing what they're supposed to do, which is do their due diligence and say, hey, maybe this isn't a great idea. Investor sentiment was extremely negative.
Yeah.
Uh, like they were losing, with an example of rework's losses is loss of 690 million on 1.5 billion of revenue. So when you think of that, right, for every they weren't really making any money. And they had SoftBank, which is they poured a ton of money into this company here. And so as the investor sentiment got more negative and negative and negative, people started to realize, well, hey, we don't think it's going to be worth 47 billion. And then the IPO got delayed, and then the estimated valuation got changed from 47 billion to 20 billion, which the 27 billion kind of write down is pretty significant, right? That's over 50%. And then people started to realize that, hey, this guy who's running it is kind of crazy, and so when you see businesses being started, right, as just kind of like for vets, right, this is just some like general like knowledge here. There is a big difference between what it takes to start a business, right, and what it takes to run a business.
Facts.
And to start a business requires sometimes a lot of vision. It requires a lot of entrepreneurial a mindset of moving fast. It requires ignoring a lot of alarm bells when people tell you this isn't going to work, and it requires a lot of charisma and energy and everything. And so you'll see people like this. You'll see like Adam Newman, right? Facebook. You had Mark Zuckerberg, before he basically turned over the company to Sheryl Sandberg. You have for Uber, you had that Travis Kalanick dude who's a total nut job.
Yeah.
And so this is something that became apparent, right? So they pulled the plug on the IPO, and then they got actually an adult in the room. They basically paid Adam Newman to go away. They paid him like
Billions.
an unholy amount of money, right? And there was a lot of criticism around that, because WeWork didn't have enough cash to even, because they fired a bunch of people, right? And I remember when I was working at my old firm, there was a bunch of people who were working at WeWork that had left, because that's just what consultants do. They leave, the firm at some point.
Yeah.
And they were like, the people like are out of work, and they were like getting hired back into our firm and everything. But they didn't have enough money to like give like severance bonuses, and they're paying this dude like billions of dollars to basically just screw off. And so now they have an actual adult in charge, and he has done, now he's doing what you actually need to do to run a business, right? He has slashed costs dramatically. They've exited leases that weren't working well. They've done all sorts of stuff, right? So WeWork is still going to be a big player in the market for flexible office space. But like when you look at like their documents now, it's much more sober. Instead of talking about lifting cosmic energy, they're talking about, hey, we decreased our OpEx by 40%.
Right. Yeah.
And so this is a way for them to now, WeWork is now going to be able to take advantage of the SPAC craze here. And what they expect, right, is when COVID begins to end, they're going to be able to, this will become more, people are going to want to work again in kind of like these small spaces, which I think is true. I mean, I think there'll be some, there'll be a return to offices that will make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we go. But the company released a slideshow for investors that provided a more toned down sales pitch than the one in its IPO prospectus in 2019, which said its mission was to elevate the world's consciousness. For instance, the slideshow included case studies of how companies could shave real estate costs by around 25% per employee by switching to WeWork. Yeah, so that's actually the sort of like stuff you would do in business, which is like, hey, how do we make more money, or how do we make the business more attractive to investors, instead of just saying outlandish stuff that isn't true. So yeah, but they'll take advantage of this SPAC, and they'll they say it's worth about 2.9 billion now is what they think, which is a far cry from 47.
Yeah. I think it's important to have some perspective on what caused a lot of like the initial investor craze, in that, from the past year, the pandemic, remote work just seems like the new normal, right? Like we've always considered remote work and everything, like working at home and having like a small space to yourself or whatever, as we've gotten very used to that. But pre-pandemic, that was still kind of a new thing. Remote work was, being able to like go to a co-working space or something and have like, that's how we have your employees work, and they can travel around anywhere. There's a WeWork, whatever. That was still kind of like a new idea. And so I think a lot of people just hopped on to like, oh my God, this is like the way of the future. This is the way of work of the future, before we'd all gotten accustomed to, really just being, I can go anywhere with a laptop and get work done.
Yeah,
All right.
we work as almost an extension of the actual kind of remote work thing, right?
Yeah.
Because they're saying like, hey, you don't need a permanent office space. If you worked in a large corporation, right, prior to COVID, uh, there was this kind of concept that WeWork had influenced where it's basically called hoteling, and you didn't have a permanent desk. You would come in, right? And you would just like find a desk that was open and you'd plug in your laptop and you would do your thing. And then you're done at the end of the day, you would just roll out, right? So you would just like, there was no, like, nobody had like permanent desks or anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this, they influenced a lot of stuff. And, cause it's just like kind of like hybrid model. It'll be interesting to see what it looks like in the future here, but stuff like this will still be around.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. We're going to move past WeWork and head to talking about Intel. So there's a couple of reasons that I wanted to bring this one up. So the title of the article is Intel CEO presses turnaround effort with a $20 billion investment plan. And there's a number of reasons that I want to talk about this one. One, there is a current global chip shortage going on. And it's kind of something like, if you're not super in tune with the news, like, you probably don't realize that it's happening, but can have pretty profound impacts on a number of things. I mean, everything nowadays has a chip in it, seemingly. And this is impacting how companies manufacture their goods. Additionally, I think it's worth noting that Intel and Apple have long been paired up together. MacBooks and Macs have long had Intel chips, and that's been like a kind of like a key part of their value proposition, and having like a good solid product is like, it's got an Intel inside. And I think it was maybe last year that Apple decided that they're going to start manufacturing their own chip called the M1. And so that was a huge blow to Intel, because that had long been a core part of their business, was making Apple chips. And now Apple's both saying that they're going to remove their business, but also, hey, we make better chips than than Intel. So that also begins to erode Intel's value proposition of, we make really good chips, because apparently someone else can just hop in and make their chips also. So in kind of like looking at this story, Kyle, what are your thoughts on like what Intel is going to do about this situation?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Southwest, right? And there were Intel chip fab plants out there growing up. I always thought that was really cool, right? But as the demand became more and more apparent, so much of this stuff got outsourced overseas, right? They could do it quicker, better, faster, cheaper over in China, for example. And so for Intel, right? Intel's kind of at an inflection point, right? I mean, there's still the U.S. now only accounts for 12% of like global semiconductor manufacturing capacity, which is down from 37% in 1990. But there still is a really strong demand for chip manufacturing, right? Everything has chips in it. Most notably, if you've been following it all, the auto industry has been suffering greatly,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
with huge production slowdowns and everything, right? And not just like fancy, like super automated cars like Tesla or something. Like, it's even something like an F-150, which now has a ton of computers in it. The minivan my wife drives around has like, I mean, it has so many computers in it, it keeps breaking because we have to take it back, right? So everything has all these chips in it, right? And so Intel is trying to figure out, hey, what is the best way to kind of take advantage of this? And one of the things they're doing is they're bidding on a Pentagon contract to build a fabrication capacity here in the U.S., right? Because obviously, the U.S. Government is not too thrilled about all of its semiconductors coming from China.
I could see that being a
So
problem.
yeah,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so I said, if they can have a Pentagon contract where they can do fabrication here in the U.S., huge boon, good for America as a whole, right? And this goes back to the whole shipping thing we were talking about earlier. This just-in-time manufacturing stuff. Like, what if we need to build more, aircraft or build, more like you
Yeah.
can't, because like it's important stuff, right? And what Intel also wants to do is it's still going to do some outsourcing here, right? But it wants to do outsourcing with the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing and Samsung Electronics. And so they want to kind of do this in like a Lego brick manner, right? So they would outsource some core components of the central processor, but other components they would have here, and they would just kind of put them together piece by piece. But the entire idea is to just find a way to remain competitive, right? They just have
Right.
got to find a way to get costs under control and still be able to, grow, make a profit and grow, right? And growth is just, it's so important for companies, right? Companies are expected to grow every year. So it'll be interesting to see if they can turn it around. Uh, but yeah, but we'll see though. If they're able to pull it off, I'm all for it. I would love to have a large, U.S. chip manufacturer, but Intel's been having trouble for years.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's been fascinating to see the interplay between Intel and Apple. Of Apple released the M1 and said they weren't gonna be working with Intel anymore, and they're like the M1's better, and Intel's like bullshit. Our chips are better, and they're like, Apple kind of just ignores them, and Intel's like, no, 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 but really, like our chips are better. There's just kind of like this back and forth kind of corporate, like playground rivalry going on between these two major companies.
Yeah, yeah, and this is the new, this is the China U.S. economy, right? Like you're going to see a bit of a decoupling, from these traditional chip, manufacturing semiconductor capabilities that have been the mainstay of what's been going on for the past decade. It's gonna be wild, because like, I mean, you could probably, hey, like China's gonna have its own semiconductor manufacturing capability, and we're gonna have ours.
Yeah, yeah. All right, well, we'll wrap up the chip speak and head into our last story, where we're going to be talking about Disney and kind of specifically Disney Plus. And so I'll be totally honest. So kind of to peel back the curtain for everyone listening, essentially the way like Kyle and I find the stories for this show is, we spend the week or the couple days prior to this just scouring the news, finding good stuff. I know I'm old school and like I actually like read the paper every day, and so I kind of just like earmark stories throughout the week, and then I have like a pile of newspapers that I read through. So Kyle sent me this article about Disney, and at first glance I looked at it and was like, "What are we going to talk about here?" And then as I started reading through the story, I was like, "Oh, there's a lot of cool things we can talk about in the story." Um, so what initially attracted your eye to want to discuss this one today, Kyle?
I think it's interesting for me because it's this past year has been a big test on uh, new ways of doing business, right, and testing out different business models, specifically around entertainment. But COVID will, at some point, and it's beginning to release its grip. The U.S. has had a lot of success with vaccinations, and everybody listening should go get their vaccine, even if you're young. Um, and what is going to happen here is Disney is trying to figure out, because Disney Plus has been a huge boon to their bottom line. They're trying to figure out how can we continue to kind of do this hybrid model of, or this model of releasing a new release on, say, Disney Plus, and then compete with a movie market that's continuing to reopen, right? Because people still want to go to movies.
Yeah,
I mean, it's something that's fun to do. It's entertainment.
yeah,
It's fairly low cost, right? If you're looking to do something on a weekend. Um, and so what they said here is, it said earlier this week, the entertainment titan announced a price shift in its plans for Black Widow. The much anticipated next chapter in its Marvel Cinematic Universe was set to release in theaters on May 7th, 1 year after the original planned date was stymied by the global pandemic. But now it's pushed it back to July 9th, and threw in a plot twist. Black Widow will be available on its Disney Plus streaming service the same day under its Premier Access plan, under it charges subscribers an additional $30 to watch the movie. Right. So what this is basically saying is, hey, we are going to try and see how well this movie does against in the reopened theater market, because Disney recently released a movie called Raya, which I watched with my family. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but it's because I'm just getting older now.
yeah.
And from what I read, it was actually really hurt by not having a theatrical release as well. So they're going
Yeah.
to try this hybrid model where they want to do both, essentially, and try to really price discriminate and find every available consumer they can. And so and they're going to be competing against. There's 24 movies slated for a wide release in the 14-week quarter, coming up here in the summer, which is like typically when the biggest movies are released, right? Because there's no sports on, people have more free time to go outside. So they want to see exactly how this is going to play out, right? There's an interesting, yeah. So like they're using like Wonder Woman 1984 as a comp. So Disney's $30 surcharge for Black Widow is much closer in price to a date night at the movie and will cannibalize fewer theater visits solely on the basis of price, right? So they don't want to discourage people from going to the movies here, but they want to make sure that they're still kind of like capturing everybody who can't go. So like, for example, me and my wife would probably have trouble going because, I've got kids and, it's a huge pain to arrange for all of that. But hey, if I can just spend $30, right, that's capturing market share, but still not stealing from the theaters enough in a way that doesn't make sense. Because Disney, or movie production companies rely on theaters as distribution channels, right?
Yeah.
They're very closely intertwined. And they got to maintain those relationships and they don't want to cannibalize them. And, people think movie theaters are going to be dead, but like movie theaters will come back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm very confident on that too.
Just like everything else, but it's going to be, it'll be like a hybrid model, right? So you can kind of look at post-COVID, whenever that occurs. So I just think this is really, really, really interesting, right? Because this it's the changing world that we're going to live in that COVID has put us through.
Yeah, just a few things I want to touch on here for everyone. One, just to kind of clarify the term cannibalization, if you've heard it. So it's essentially, if you're a company and you have multiple different products, if you have one product that's eating away at the sales of another product, that's cannibalization, right? So in this case with Disney, if they're releasing something on Disney Plus and it's stopping people from then, going to the theaters and paying for that, that would be cannibalizing those sales. Okay. But I think like kind of comparing like you and I, Kyle, this provides a good example of how like different consumers interact, right? So like you have a wife and kids, okay? So it's a higher barrier for you to jump to go to the movies. So it's probably easier for your family to just spend the $30 and stay at home and watch the movies versus like I'm a single dude. Even if I'm like taking someone out on a date, $30 that's a little much. Like I'm just going to just go to the movies and spend it, right? But either way, like Disney is still capturing like both of our markets to get us to go see this movie. And the other way I saw in the article, like they kind of built this into their strategy is that if people like want to watch Black Widow, they then have to like sign up for a Disney Plus account and now you're signed up for it and you're in the system and now like you're part of a subscriber. Okay. And I think it's been really fascinating. When Disney Plus first launched, people were like, oh my gosh, they're just not going to have the breadth of content to be able to compete with Netflix or Amazon Prime or anything. And like, they're just like, what is Disney doing? And their numbers have just been blowing it out of the water. And like they've been putting up good stuff and like people are going to Disney Plus and it's doing super well.
Something that's the whole, SITREPs thing has taught me is just how powerful content is, right? When you post something that does really well, it's because it's good content, right? And people are like, when is the best time to post? The best time to post is when you have good content, period, right? That aligns with whatever cycle is currently going on with, like if you have like good content with this, shipping, container ship, right? It can go crazy. But here's what I was looking for. It said Disney's Raya and the Last Dragon earlier this month. That movie was available on Disney Plus for $30 on the day of its release, but it took only 8.6 million at North American box office on its opening weekend. And so what they're basically saying here is even trying this model of just only releasing movies on the internet or through Disney Plus or whatever doesn't work. Even in a situation where you can't even go to the movie theaters, or the movie theaters are greatly reduced. It barely took any money, right? So you need theatrical support to basically prop up this industry and to keep it going. So that is really kind of like the core of the argument here is like exactly like you said. They want to try and capture, both, the people. Everybody wants to see the movie. They just want if you want to see the movie, you want to see it in theaters, go. If you can only watch it at home, go. So, but good for me. I've always wanted them to do that because I like watching movies, at least new movies. I usually don't watch movies twice. I watch one once and then I never watch it again, and that's just how I do it. But I like to be able to see new releases without having to, go through the 30 different steps it takes for me to be able to do that.
Yeah. No, totally get that. All right, everyone, that wraps up the show for the week. So one, we appreciate you all coming in and listening to Kyle and I riff and raff on, the things of the past week. This is just a friendly reminder. If If you like what we're doing here, please leave a review. It kind of does a number of things. It helps other people find the show, and also just gives us feedback on what we're doing. So we really appreciate any reviews that you all leave on the show here. So before we sign off, Kyle, you got any last words you want to say?
Nope. I appreciate everybody who's listening to the show, and hope everybody has a great week.
Yeah. All right. Stay safe, y'all, and we'll see you next week. All right. Take care.